why don't we go ahead and get started? But let me introduce Mike. Mike Lane lives in Florida. His bonsai journey began in 2008 after receiving a small juniper as a gift, which is how many of us start. I think that little tree didn't last too long, but he very quickly started getting tutelage under Eric Weingart, and then he quickly grew his bonsai knowledge and actually began teaching in 2012, doing workshops and demonstrations throughout Florida, his home state. He now travels all over the US and also does Zoom presentations as well. And your concentration has been primarily that of shohin and tropical bonsai.
Yeah.
And he's had several bonsai accepted in the US National Bonsai Show, which is quite a feather in your cap. His website and education center is kitsunabonsai.com. It's an online resource for classes and programs and merchandise. Last year, you got to do your first international travel to India to do presentation, which is, I bet, was fascinating.
It was.
And we are in for a treat tonight. He's going to be discussing the clip and grow theory and application with the focus on proportion and wound closure. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Lane, and he's going to take it over now.
Thank you, guys.
Enjoy.
Thank you, Dodie. And thank you guys for having me. This is a big honor. I just recently did my first tour out west this past year, traveling out to California and meeting some of you guys. And so it's really, honestly, it's and like I said, an honor to come back and teach again with several new people, it looks like. So as Dodie was saying, tonight's program is going to focus on clip and grow bonsai, as well as proportion and wound closure. Now, the tree that's kind of pictured here, it is important. I want to always point out that I used 2 wires to build this tree here. And so this is a really good method for people who can't wire or don't want to have to wire, but it's not necessarily a technique that you can't use wire with either. So we're going to clarify some of the nomenclature and some of the words that are used and thrown around in clip and grow. And we're really going to dive deep into the theory of it and how we build trees in this method. So we do welcome you to ask questions in the chat. And at any point, I will stop and answer those. I don't want this just to be a monologue for 2 hours and then questions. So feel free, if you see something that's confusing, I'll elaborate to the best of my abilities. Okay. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. So what is clip and grow bonsai? So contrary to the name, clip and grow is not just trimming a tree to a silhouette for many years. So I have traveled a lot, and I've seen people say that they do clip and grow bonsai or profess clip and grow bonsai. And a lot of times these trees have just been kind of silhouette pruned into a tree, or like a hedge pruned into a tree. And that's not necessarily what clip and grow is. Clip and grow instead refers to the process of growing portions of the tree to a desired diameter before you ever cut it, then divide it and move on to another section of the tree. So basically, we build each part of the tree stage by stage, branch by branch, and we don't cut until it gets to the size that we want. And so that's what the clip and grow means, is there's a long period of growing before we then clip it all back, and then grow it again, and then clip it all back. So it's really, really good for growing proper aesthetic proportions, so realistic tree proportions, and also very, very good for closing wounds. Wire may or may not be used, as the focus of clip and grow is not necessarily avoiding wire and bindings, but rather it is used to grow accurate proportions and heal wounds in a fast and efficient manner. So if we do use wire, some people refer to that as semi-clip and grow. I don't really, to me, if you're running the branch and you're growing it for a long period of time before cutting it back, that's clip and grow to me, whether you wired that branch or not. So, but you can call it semi clip and grow, you know, to kind of avoid any confusion. So the original clip and grow comes from China and is known as the Art of Lingnan. It's a school of Penjing, also known as the Southern School or Cantonese bonsai, and they basically focus on pure clip and grow. Wire is typically not used. However, other bindings and methods to train branches may or may not be used. So they do pride themselves on the fact that they don't use wire. So other bindings may be used, but primarily the goal is to use primarily scissor work. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Black Scissors community, but that's one of their kind of MOs, is that you can create a bonsai with nothing but a pair of scissors. You know, branches and trunks, just like we were saying, are grown to proportion before being cut. And directing a branch requires pruning to an appropriate branch or bud and allowing it to then run and thicken for a time before it too is cut. So in Lingnan style, this won't be how we do things in modern clip and grow, but in Lingnan style, you will grow a branch for a long period of time and sacrifice that whole branch just to cut it back to like a bud that's growing down. So you're not going to use wire to build movement into the branches. So you're going to be using a lot of cutting back to specific buds going in the direction you want. So directional pruning is another way that it can be worded. Branches take on abstract and unpredictable twists, turns, and angles. With many pruning patterns exist, including upright, weeping, windswept, and literati, to name a few. So this pictured is a Lingnan style tree. By convention, though, all that movement would not be wired into the tree. That would all be pruned into the tree. This is another Lingnan style. So all the movement, all the proportion is grown into the tree and pruned into the tree, not wired. And another Lingnan style tree. Now, I really talk a lot about proportion because one of the things that became clear to me early on in my bonsai is a good example of this is a sumo tree. If we look at two sumo trees and one sumo tree has a bunch of big trunk wounds on it and it has skinny little branches, well, then the taper doesn't necessarily make sense. You know, for the bottom part of the tree to be so much bigger than the top part and to create that sumo aesthetic, you have to have a big branch feeding the low fat part. And so you have to have the proportional size to that branch. If you have a skinny branch on a wide giant nabari, that doesn't tell proper aesthetic proportion. It wouldn't feed and taper the tree in that method. So in my opinion, a lot of this clip and grow proportion is much more accurate to at least broadleaf trees that we experience in the tropics, such as ficus trees, even our live oaks, things like that have a much more similar proportion to what you'll see in clip and grow. So this is a windswept Lingnan. And so again, all of this is clipped into the tree. And another Lingnan style. So one of my biggest influences in bonsai as a whole is a Taiwanese artist named Swan Low. And why I find Taiwanese bonsai so fascinating is they have the creativity of Chinese Penjing, but with the refinement of and skill of Japanese bonsai. So Taiwan was occupied by Japan for 50 years, and being primarily of Chinese heritage, you know, you have that mix of culture. And so their bonsai became very, very refined, similar to the Japanese style. They also work with a lot of the similar species that we work with in Florida. And so when I first saw his work, it was like nothing I had ever seen before it. So he really stood out as a pioneer for this kind of clip and grow bonsai. And we'll look at a few of his trees in a second once I talk about a little background about him. So He was born in 1956 in Tianwei, Taiwan, and his father built the family bonsai nursery in 1947. 1978, he graduated from Tom King University, having studied Chinese art and literature. So that'll be important in a second. He began actively practicing bonsai during the early 80s, earning several awards. And in 1999, he began teaching and currently operates the Swan Low Bonsai School, as well as traveling internationally to teach, judge, and exhibit. A true artist, his works have met with near universal acclaim, owing to his exploration of aesthetic using the principles found in Chinese art and Taoism. So one of the key differences when you're looking at Penjing versus Japanese bonsai is the cultural difference between Shinto and Zen Buddhism that you'll find influencing bonsai, and Taoism that influences Penjing. And so where that really plays a clear role is in one of his guiding philosophies. In his book, he basically talks about mixing in straight sections into sections of the tree with movement. And his reason for that is yin and yang, which is a Taoist principle. And he talks about how a tree should, if it's too consistent, if you have curve on curve on curve, movement on movement on movement, it's just as boring as a straight line. So that yin and yang really sets his bonsai apart. In 2010, he published his book, A Bonsai Journey. And although only published in one language, Taiwanese, it has helped in sharing his work with the bonsai community. So I've only ever seen his book in Taiwanese, and I still have seriously pored over that book cover to cover more times than probably any other bonsai book. And we'll look at some of his work, and we'll kind of discuss why I think he's so inspirational. So this is a blurry photo. I couldn't find a clear photo of this. But what I want to show is the proportions of this, his style of growing trees. So look at the size of each of these trunks or / branches. It's hard to tell whether they're trunks or branches at this point. And he's really captured that kind of oak tree aesthetic, or more accurately, the banyan aesthetic. And he captured that with true proportion. This is a Prna. Prna microphylla, popular tropical. And again, the proportion of these trunks, the branches, we don't have little skinny, scrawny branches on here. We have giant branches that, if you read his book, took several years to kind of grow to the necessary proportion. So this was a collected tree that already had a big trunk. And instead of just growing a few wispy little piddly branches on it, he spent many years growing and thickening these large branches to become central parts to the trunk, you know. And so a lot of what you're seeing, except for the primary trunk line, is grown, you know. One of my favorite trees. So it's an absolutely massive tree, but this to me has a lot of reverse taper. It has a lot of what we would think of as flaws, but it's so accurate to nature. It's the proportions of the branches and the movement. To me, that's the most accurate ficus tree I've seen. Even with the reverse taper, it's almost more accurate with that kind of reverse taper. So there's a big difference between reverse taper caused by growing 5 to 10 branches in one point because you're scared or don't know that you should clean that out. And there's a difference between growing something so large next to something else so large that they're meeting at one point and they create a swelling there. That happens on mature trees in nature. And you'll see in trees in Kokufuten, if it happens on trees to that caliber, they don't judge it negatively. So there are certain times where reverse taper is not that big of a deal, as long as it's accurate and proportionally sound. And here's one of his more avant-garde stylings, another ficus kind of styled more like a vine. And finally, a sea hibiscus. Now, this was a tree that I've probably studied this tree more than any other tree in any book as far as bonsai goes, because when I first saw this tree, I thought it was the ugliest tree I'd ever seen. And then I came back to it and I thought it was the most beautiful tree I've ever seen. And what I've really found is that it's one of the most, it's a tree that really kind of points out how the rules don't really matter once you know what you're doing and what you're pursuing. And so I always point out how many quote unquote flaws there are in this tree. I always point out that there is no taper in the central trunk. I point out that there is, in fact, more than 3 to 4 branches coming out from one point at the top. We have reverse taper in the cascading branch. But I always question anybody who views this tree. I say, would you kick it out of your garden? If you really had this in your garden, would you get rid of it? Would you say it's too ugly for me? And most people say no. It's a really great tree, great ramification, great proportion, great movement, and above all, it's interesting. So, you know, where do you kind of start to get away from the rules is what this tree kind of points out. Another very avant-garde contemporary artist that learned from Minlo is Laurant Daire. Recently, I think, did some work out in California, and he's the creator of the Kozumiku or cosmic bonsai style, a style that's basically fundamentally a clip and grow style. And we'll talk about why and how. But he began working in bonsai when he was 15 years old. He remained self-taught, learning from many artists and masters before finally traveling throughout Southeast Asia, Taiwan, and Japan. So one of his unique traits, and one of the reasons why I think his work is also very, very forward-thinking, is that he's learned in gardens in Europe, he's learned in gardens in Taiwan, he's learned in gardens in China, and he's learned in gardens in Japan. So he has a really, really broad understanding of bonsai. And cosmic bonsai, his kind of brainchild, is a culmination of that. So it's what he feels is like the most important aspects of all of those schools of thought. So when he returned to France after studying, he used that combination of clip and grow, shatamiki, and grafting to create a style unique unto himself, known as cosmic bonsai or Kozumiku style. While most trees emulate trees from nature, cosmic bonsai brings trees from the depth of the imagination. So one of his kind of MOs to these very wild trees is that they cannot grow on this planet. You know, it sounds weird, sounds crazy, but it produces some fantastic trees. So this tree here that we're going to kind of look at is a Chinese elm. And so one of the fundamental philosophies behind cosmic bonsai is that you are never pruning the terminal branches. So the leaders that you're growing out, you're never pruning those for division until 2 years before exhibition. So if you want to start exhibiting the tree, you make a plan. You say, okay, well, I've been working on this tree for 8 years. On year 10, I'm going to exhibit it. And you start pruning it year 8. And basically, that's the point where you start refining it into a finished design where you can show it in a show. And then, according to cosmic bonsai philosophy, you then put the tree back in a grow pot and grow it out until you show it again. And that's the same philosophy when I went to India and I spoke with artists from Malaysia and Taiwan. It's the same philosophy that a lot of them do. If they're not using the tree, it goes back to growing into something else. And so some part of that is very clip and grow-esque, you know, especially the part when they finally get to the clipping. So this is also the Chinese elm. So it's just and all of this muscle, all of this kind of meat, and why it looks the way it does has to do with that way of growing things very, very long for a long period of time and then cutting them back. You're building with vast amounts of energy, vast amounts of vigor, and you're growing things quickly. So here's kind of the meat and potatoes of the theory. And this is going to get a little wordy, and we're going to probably have to really explain this well. So any questions at this point, please don't hesitate to type them into the chat, okay?
Yeah, I have one here.
Sure.
It says, which native North American deciduous tree do you believe is best suited to take this approach for a beginner?
Cedar elm is really, really good. I love cedar elm. But I've seen some great work with water elms, the Prna species that they're doing in Louisiana. But I think cedar elm is my go-to kind of deciduous North American material, at least in my neck of the woods, you know. So the theory for clip and grow basically starts with pruning the tree to a third of the height that you want it to be. So the first thing is you need to grow a trunk to the diameter you want. And more accurately, it just needs to be 60% of the diameter you want. Because once you get that stick, that log to 60% of whatever you're trying to grow, if you're trying to grow a big tree, it's going to take a while. If you're trying to grow a shohin, you really only need to grow it to where it's, a quarter of thickness, if that. And then you make your first cut about a third of the way up your desired height. So why do we make it a third of the way up the desired height? Because in traditional bonsai theory, your first branch occurs a third of the way up, the first third. And so this is going to be where our first branch occurs and where our new leader is going to also occur. So think we're building the tree from scratch. And this is going to sound like this is going to take forever. And I will tell you, at first, when you first start this process, you're going to say, damn, why did I ever listen to that guy? This is the most boring way I've ever done bonsai. But what we need to understand is that we are always doubling our efforts, and it grows exponentially. So while it starts very, very slow, after a year or so, everything starts picking up speed. And after 2 years, everything's growing very, very fast, and the tortoise beats the hare. So we make our cut a third of the way up. The next thing we're looking for is 2 buds to emerge all over on the tree. Okay. Now, anybody who's done a trunk chop before knows that you're not going to just get 2 buds. You're going to get a ton of buds, and they're not all going to appear like it is in the picture. They're going to appear all over the tree. Our job is to find the best 2 buds that are occurring at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock near the wound we just made. So why that's important is that as those branches grow, all we have to do is monitor the wound closure. So how are those branches thickening? As they approach the thickness of the trunk we cut off, they're going to heal that wound. And if we get 2 of those branches, think if we have a branch on one side of the wound and we have a branch on the other side of the wound, and we're growing both of those branches, well, they're going to heal the wound 50-50. One branch is going to heal the wound on one side, and one branch is going to heal it on the other. And that is imperative to wound healing. Imperative. If you're not working with an elm, or you're not working with a crepe or a maple or one of those ridiculous healers, then you will likely not heal the wounds you're making on your tree in a timely fashion. So why that is that a lot of trees, you have to grow what you cut off. If I don't get that second branch on the opposite side of the wound, then I have to grow the same diameter of branch that I just cut off to heal the wound I just made. So I made, in my mind, in the type of trees I'm trying to make with no wounds, I made no progress because I got very little taper. All I did was create a wound on the tree that I had to heal, and I had to grow exactly back the same size branch I just removed. So I make very little progress on the ramification or design of the tree. So the only time I move forward is when I get 2 branches, okay? And we're going to talk about that. I'll show you some examples of times where I've had to fight the war of attrition, where I get 1 branch, 1 branch, 1 branch, then finally I get 2, and I start moving forward, okay?
Now, let me, we've got a question.
Yeah, sure.
One person, if you pick 2 opposing buds, is there a risk of ending up with bar branches?
No, because the thing about a bar branch that we're not told is that you have to have the central trunk, like you have to have a pitchfork. There has to essentially be a pitchfork. So a bar branch, if we have a trunk going upwards and then branches teeing off at the exact same height, then that's 3 points of growth that are meeting at one point, the trunk and the 2 branches. And so that's where you get uneven thickening. But if you just have 2, and I have 2 branches meeting even Steven on the trunk, and one grows 50% and the other grows 50%, well, they should thicken the trunk accordingly, 50% down one side and 50% down the other. Now, like I was saying in some of the previous slides, is there is no way to avoid 100% all reverse taper on all species using this method, because you're growing things too big and you're growing them in close proximity. But it's the same on any tree. You could go through and look at very, very old trees in Japan that have been bonsai for 60 to 100 years, and I promise you, you will find tons of them that have this uncontrollable reverse taper that you can't get away from. In a lot of scenarios, it's just a problem with age. It's a problem with two branches that have gotten too big meeting at one point. So I don't think it will create the type of reverse taper that you're thinking, like the swelling, the gall, or the tumor. It's not going to create that.
I think he was referring to the bar branch, though. If you have two branches at the equal height, so to speak.
Yeah, so you'll see though, because one is going to go up. So if we fast forward a little bit, if you look at this image here, you'll see that one of those is going to be left to grow thicker, and it's not going to be just a primary branch.
Okay.
So, but let's kind of really talk this out, because this was very confusing for me for a long time. But once I kind of got it, I never went back. I never did my trees the old way again. So these two opposing buds, you're likely going to get buds that don't occur right at the wound site. That's almost guaranteed. I wish it was that easy, that you just cut and they form right where you cut and that's it. They're going to form under the cut. And what you're going to have to do is pick the two buds that are closest to that approximation of 10 and 2, and you have to usually recut to make a cut that makes a wound in between those two buds. So realistically, you're going to have two cuts. You're going to cut the tree once, you're going to wait for the buds to emerge, and then depending on where the best two buds are, you're going to recut and clean that meat out from between them. And so then all we have to do is watch the wound. So now this is the easiest part, is we're following an algorithm. You don't have to think about style. You don't have to think about any of that. It's an algorithm. And this is how they form 200 similar looking trees in Japan that are all flawless, but they're all very similar looking, is they're following an algorithm. And so the simplest way to use this algorithm is to grow like a broom style, where you're basically running those two branches 50-50 at the same rate. So each branch is growing 50% on one side, 50% on the other, and they'll meet in the middle, and both of those branches should be the same size before we then cut those and divide them to 4. So it should go 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and so on and so forth. But each divide should be 50%. So it should be 50-50 on those wounds. And so think of how this creates a woundless tree. If we're constantly, each time we prune, we look for two buds on the opposite edge of that wound, and all we do is wait for those two buds to grow out into branches and to touch each other at the base, well then all we have to do is track the wound each time, and we go 1, make a cut, go to 2, make 2 cuts, go to 4, make 4 cuts, go to 8, and so you're doubling your branches every time until you make what's kind of pictured here. And that's the easiest way to use clip and grow theory. And you'll use this theory as well to build the branch pads. So when you're actually laying out branch pads, you're going to build little brooms, little diagrams just like that. 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to so on and so forth. Now it's going to get more complicated than that, unfortunately, because that's how I learned clip and grow, was just growing everything evenly and just letting the wounds meet in the middle. But that's not going to create an informal upright. That's not going to create a slanting style. So we're going to need to kind of change our theory a little bit. And this is where it gets a little more complicated. So if we want to create an informal upright, we basically switch from a 50-50 theory to a 25-75 theory. What that means is that as we start to get a little bit of wound healing, we will basically get 25% of it healed on one side, and then we will cut one of those leaders. So we'll be running 2 of those, and we'll cut one of those and leave the other one long. We won't cut it, and we will allow the other leader, the one that we did not cut, to grow until it heals that wound. So basically, we're going to heal 25% of the wound off to the left and 75% of the wound with the new leader. And again, I know this sounds daunting. This sounds crazy. Why would you do this? But it's a tortoise beats the hare thing. You really will pick up speed, and as you're doubling your branches each time, you're going to be amazed at how fast you move nearer to the finish line. So the lower first branch is pruned and divided into 2, and we start following that same algorithm with that first branch. We wait for the 2 buds, we clean the wound in between the 2 buds, and we start running out 2 more branches to create our first bifurcation for our first branch. As the buds grow into branches, the pattern is repeated. So once the primary wound is healed, we then cut the leader to 1 or 2 nodes and or buds and repeat the process. So you see, we basically have grown, we've healed that first wound completely, and now we're making the cut to start a new top and to start our second branch. And so you're just going to repeat this pattern until you build the whole tree. Okay? As each wound heals on the lower branch, we continue to cut back to divide the branch to find a ramification. So you can see in the picture, each time we're kind of pruning the top, we're also pruning the bottom. Okay. While progressing forward, we continually repeat our process on the lowest branch and begin the same process on the 2 upper branches. One is pruned while the other is allowed to become the new top. So you can think of it like that. Another way to think of this is that you're only ever using 2 branches. Everything is going to be built off of pairs of 2s. And so it's up to you how you're going to do it, but one of those pairs of 2s needs to be a top, and one of those 2s needs to be either a side branch or a back branch. So you got to figure out how to kind of rotate those 2s around the tree to build side branch, back branch, side branch, back branch, and kind of continue those stages up the tree. So next we continue to apply our process on the 2 lowest branches, beginning it on the 2 highest. One of the current pair will now be grown to the back if possible, and the other grown up as the new leader. Now, like I said, it's never going to work out that perfectly where, oh, hey, it's my 3rd cut. I got a back branch. Awesome. You're likely going to get a branch that's going to be, you're going to have to pick the one that's closest approximation to a back branch. You know, you're going to have to get tricky. And that's what makes Clip and Grow a lot of fun too, is even if it's an algorithm, and even if you know somewhat of what you're going to get, you don't know 100%, and there's still a lot that's left up to chance. Okay.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
One is about the crepe. You mentioned crepe myrtles.
Yes.
And this person says, I have a shohin crepe that I chopped with lots of small branches appearing that are about 3 inches in length. I'm assuming that's where the cut was.
Probably.
That's what he's saying. When do you, how do you progress that, and when do you trim off the other buds around the wound?
So if they're about 3 inches long, that's, I'd maybe give them, wait until they get to about 4 inches, and then go ahead and get rid of all the branches that are not in good locations. Like pare it down to the 2 best branches. And now here's where things get critical. This is where this is tricky, is when you pare down, when you're first in this building phase and you've only got 2 branches on the tree, this is where it's so critical to not weaken the tree too much and really, really like water the tree appropriately because right now it's budding out, and it's budding out a lot of buds, and it's happy and it's going to recover just fine. But what you're about to do is thin it even more down to 2 branches, and it's going to be really important that nothing happens to those branches, that it doesn't stay too wet. And once they pick up some steam and they get to be about 8 inches long, then you don't have to worry about it as much anymore. But while they're still small and piddly, and they're still kind of growing, starting to mature, that's when we run a big risk of the tree being very weak, overwatering, underwatering, those kind of issues. Pests are a much bigger issue. So what I'm getting at is just be on your A game when you finally do decide to pare down to that first pair, because that's going to be the weakest the tree is going to be the whole building process.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. And you had another one you said?
Well, I kind of combined them.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think, Michael, if I didn't get your question answered, type it in again.
Awesome. Awesome. So the numerous branches are now basically, I don't want to skip this first one.
Yeah, yeah.
We now continue the described process again and again. However, each time the wound takes less time to heal and the duration between pruning is reduced accordingly. So think of it like this. If I start with a silver dollar size wound and I divide that into two half silver dollar size wounds, okay, it's going to take half the time to close those, correct? Half the time that it took to close the big wound. So now my next stage is going to take half the time that it took to do that first stage. And so now my third stage is going to take a 1/4 of the time, and so on and so forth. The next stage will take 1/8 of the time. And so this is what I was talking about exponential kind of rewards. It's just like compound interest. Is nobody likes the idea of compound interest till they're cashing in the check at the end of the day. You know, so it's the same thing with bonsai. Is you're going to start slow, and you're just going to accrue that interest, and then you'll be cooking.
I have a question about tropicals.
Sure.
What time of year are you making your cuts?
Spring through fall. So I will do my cuts. Usually I won't do any major cuts past November. And I will start doing major cuts around March on some species. So some tropical species. I will open up every tropical. I will say every tropical opens up in May. So there's nothing I won't work on in May.
Now, what about California, where particularly Northern California is colder?
I'd wait until May, you know, when you're at your May, even June, you know, if you're still cool, then wait till June. Because you want to pot your tropicals when temperatures are consistently above 65 in the evenings. So, you know, you don't want to do it when you're getting these like dips down to 50s. And the only reason it won't kill the tree typically going down to 50s, but your recovery rate will slow so much that your odds of watering correctly and doing what you need to do on the right schedule is going to be very difficult. And so it's better to wait until the tree's growing vigorously, and that way it recovers super fast.
I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Would this method be best if the tree is grown in the ground rather than in a container?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's fastest. And so think it's and we're going to talk about that too. It's big container versus little container. Is a big container is the way to go if you're going to do clip and grow, because you're growing things so big and so wild for a time, and you're going to dry the plant out. If you're in a small pot, you can only run a branch so far before it exceeds water supply. And then you can water it again, sure, but there will be a point where you can't water it 8 times a day. And then it just makes more sense to be in a bigger pot. So, you know, if depending on the size of the project, I grow shohin. So for me, you know, I don't need to grow them in the ground. I can grow them in big pots. But if you're trying to grow a big project, then yes, the ground is absolutely the way to go. It will save you a lot of time, and even a big pot will save you a lot of time. So definitely a good method and good question.
I had another question. Are there any sacrifice branches used below these clip and grow branches to thicken the trunk further?
Shouldn't need them. You shouldn't need them. Proportions should be so locked into the tree at this point that it's never going anywhere. And that's what the beauty of this is. There's no kind of losing this taper realistically once it's built. It's and you will build true sumo trees in this fashion. Like if I wanted to grow a really fat sumo tree, all I need to do is continue to run the ratio of what my 25% on that first branch would be. So instead of cutting it, you know, when it is healing 25% of that wound, you can't overheal the wound. So just run that first branch until it's really, really fat, and then let the leader continue to run it until you build this absolutely massive base. But with this method, you really don't need to go backwards too often. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is there's not a lot of times where you have to sit and you get the tree 90% done and you're trying to scratch your head thinking about how to get a back branch. You would never go past the point of making the back branch. You would never go past that stage. So it's usually a lot of this is taken care of before we finish the tree out. And so you won't have to go backwards usually. Good question though. So the height of the tree will now determine the amount of stages required to finish the tree. So this is what we were just talking about the size of the project is if I'm growing a big project, I can use a lot of stages and repeat this methodology, you know, to as big as I want. And if I don't want to wait that long and I just want to create a flawless shohin, well, then I just wait until I build up to the height I need or the size I need in that range. So I like shohin. It's concise. I can wrap up one of these clip and grow projects in a year or 2 years and refine it the rest of the time. So I can really get some high quality trees very quickly and get through the part that I don't necessarily enjoy that much very quickly. And so what I was just saying too is proportion should also be clearly established with each stage tapering to the next. There's no going back. This isn't going to be something where you're run the risk of losing this taper later on in life and have to cut the tree back and rebuild it. It's not going to happen because that's such a stark difference and the proportion is set in the actual trunk of the tree. So this was something that took me a long time to understand about proportion is if I take a trunk chopped log with no branches on it, I can now never grow a branch to a third of that trunk size without also increasing that trunk size. So there are certain proportions that you're locked out of, you see, if that makes sense. You know, and this was something that we had a bonsai professional, Min Lo, actually come to our nursery and say that to us. And it took me years to really understand what that meant. Is if you don't have branches on a tree and you start to grow branches out of a giant stump, well, those branches can never grow to the proportion a third of the trunk because they'll just add their weight to that trunk. So it's a very stark proportion that you'll find in clip and grow.
I had a question. Do you do any root work while growing out the tree?
Absolutely. And so that was one of my initial mistakes when I first started doing this was focusing all my time on the top of the tree. But no, you should take, if you want to do it the best way, is you should take subsequent years off. Like you should take every other time you're working the tree and do root work. And the reason you're going to be hesitant to do it is it's going to slow down the top of the tree. And so think you're going to put in a solid year to the top of the tree and you're going to be growing great. Everything's growing awesome. You have great momentum. You're making great progress. And then all of a sudden you do root work. And now that tree takes another year to rebuild that momentum back to where you had it and get back on track for that progress. And so that's why people are hesitant to do the root work. But unfortunately, if you don't do it, you'll have to make corrections later on, like ground layering and doing things like that, the work is either going to be done on the front end or the back end. And so it's just kind of easier to do it on the front end, I think. So great questions. So this is known as bifurcation. Dividing branches into two. That's bifurcation. And this is the process that is the oldest way of building bonsai. And it's kind of in vogue again. So you talk to most Japanese trained professionals and most of them are building branches and trunks off of bifurcation. When paired with development theory, it makes for a potent combo and growing complex shapes quickly and getting a higher quality tree to refinement quicker. So what is development theory? Development theory is basically not bonsai. Eliminate bonsai from your mind. If I were to tell you, how do you grow a tree fast? What would you say? You'd say, well, Mike, I'd put it in a big pot. I'd fertilize the hell out of it and I wouldn't touch it. And that's exactly what development theory is you're going to put it in a big pot. You're going to set your design and you're not going to touch it until it's time. And you're going to let that thing grow very fast to get to the shape you want very quickly. Okay, tortoise beats the hare. One of the reasons this became so appealing to me is I got tired of fixing flaws on other people's trees. So when you go to a nursery and you buy a tree, the first thing you do, and it's not the fault of the nursery grower, they're just growing a material. But the point is that they're not growing that material from what you had in mind. They're growing tons of possibilities, and 90% of those possibilities you're not going to use. And so when you buy the tree, we've all done it. You buy a tree, and the first thing you do to it is you cut a ton of stuff off of it. And that's because that stuff wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't grown to your design. So what if you just never grew that stuff? How much time would you save fixing flaws and fixing wounds and all that stuff if you just never grew them? And that's what clip and grow is kind of about, is tortoise beats the hare, is you aren't making a lot of these flaws. So you don't have to fix a lot of this stuff. So let's talk about some issues you're going to face as you do this, because this is, it's not going to go so hunky-dory, as I always say. Another useful technique that you're going to need is partial defoliation. So as the top starts to get too strong, if we're running that leader too strong, it's going to start soaking up all the energy away from the ramification, and it's going to start killing off the ramification. And you will hit a point where you can't balance it out without pruning it. You're going to have to prune that top. Well, that's going to slow down the thickening of the tree, and you're going to divide that branch or trunk prematurely, and it's going to mess up proportion. So we don't want to prune until we hit the right proportion. So we take leaves off of the strongest areas of the tree, just leaves. We're not cutting it. We're just, if I need to slow it down, I take off a bunch of solar panels so it can't feed itself as much. And so that slows down the main leader and redirects some more of that energy towards the ramification and kind of balances things out. This is also important if I'm running those two branches, and we were talking about 50-50. Let's say I wanted to grow a broom 50-50. If one of them starts growing faster than the other, well, I'm not going to get my 50-50. So I'll need to slow one of them down and let the other one catch up. And so you'll just do that by taking a few leaves off of the strong one, proportional to how many the weak one has. So if the weak one has 2 leaves, you'll take off a ton of leaves off the strong branch, maybe only leave 2 leaves. So, so another way, partial defoliation, another like kind of systematic way of doing it, and this is like how they would teach it in Japan, is as certain areas grow too strong, they'll steal the energy. To combat that, you will fully defoliate all strong growth, leaving the terminal bud intact. You will locate the medium growth, and you'll remove about half the leaves. And finally, you will leave the weak growth untouched. And so that systematic kind of 3-stage process will balance everything on the tree. So again, depending on the size and complexity of the project, results can vary in time from 1 year for shohin projects to 10+ years for large, complicated trees. So that's the reality of the beast. Like 10+ years to grow a perfect 30-inch tree is not that much. People spend 15 years growing little bunjin pines. So 10 years to grow a massive, massive tree isn't that big of a deal. And you'll see some of these guys in Taiwan, what the culture dictates is that you do put 30 years into one of these clip and grow trees, and that's your magnum opus. That's like you retire off that sucker. Maybe you grow 10 of those, and you have 10 of these 30-year trees, and that's like your masterpiece. That's your life's work. And so you don't have to do every tree that way, but you can see how perpetually following this algorithm, you can make some really cool shapes. You can make some really cool trees with cool proportions.
Excellent. I have several questions here.
Sure. Yeah.
One asked, what is ground layering?
Great question. So ground layering is the same process as air layering, but you're doing it to try and grow like a new nabari, or you're trying to fix roots on a tree. So if I have kind of erroneous roots, or let's say I have one-sided nabari where the roots are all to one side, I might air layer right above that and grow new radial roots that maybe are in a better pattern where more of them emerge radially, and then I'll cut and just regrow the nabari. And I'll do that. I've done that plenty of times. So I don't have any issue doing ground layers. I just feel that it's not always a guarantee you're going to get the roots 100% radially. It's not always a guarantee that it's going to layer on the first try. And so it's just more of a pain in the butt to have to layer it than it is to just do good root work as you're working the tree. And because this is an algorithm, I don't do one of these at a time. I don't sit there and like grow one cutting and stare at it for a year. You know, I grow like 30 of these at a time, and it takes up, because it's so small when you're starting, it takes up such a small area that by the time I close out a year, I pick my favorites and I move forward with those, and I do whatever I need to do with the rest, get rid of them, sell them, you know, I figure it out. But I basically grow a ton of these under this algorithm, and pick my favorites. And so that's been a big change as well. So
Another question on
yeah,
fertilizer. Are
yep.
you using a high nitrogen or potassium fertilizer during this using this method?
I am high nitrogen until I get to about, until I get to about quaternaries. So when I've built most of my primaries, tertiaries, and get into my quaternaries, I'll usually start feeding with organics then and slowing everything down. And I also, likewise, when I start getting to certain positions in the tree. So if I start getting into the top of the tree, if I'm making a small tree and I'm starting to grow my final apex, well, I know I need to grow that slow. I need to grow everything in the top of the tree very, very slow. So if you're growing the final third of your tree, that's when you should start feeding with lighter nitrogen fertilizer. And same with your ramification to the branches. If you're getting towards the finer ramification of your primary branches, you should start fertilizing with low nitrogen fertilizer. Any other questions?
Not right now.
Perfect. So at this point, our tree would be complete and the refinement stage is entered. Once in refinement, growth stalls and big changes become difficult to accomplish. So remember this, once we put it in a bonsai pot, once we start pruning it all the time, we can't make those big changes anymore. So we want as much of our heavy lifting done as possible. For this reason, I again recommend big pots, high nitrogen fertilizer, and careful restricted pruning regimen as discussed in the previous slides. And so this is a little mame. This took literally like 8 months to make. And it's fully healed. You can see the various points. Let me see if I can get a little. Can anybody see my mouse? Can
Yes.
I see? Okay. So my mouse here will show you this was cut number 1 here. And I basically grew this branch out to 25% and this out to 75%. And then this is cut number 2 here. So right in the middle there. And then this is cut number 3 right here. And so you'll see each time I'm dividing to 2 and getting stark proportional differences. No wire used. So we're about to dive into some actual progressions, but I want to talk about a few tips that'll help you guys before we get into the progressions. Like I said, large pots are super helpful. Movement can be wired into small sections, and the ensuing strong growth will set the bends and ensure that the branch maintains position when the wire is removed. So the benefit of growing things so strong and vigorously is that when movement sets, it sets. It's not like, oh, well, I have to wire it 12 more times and then it'll set. No, it's done. One and done. And so, so we're going to have to change our theory of wiring a little bit. Is usually when you wire, you're going to wire half the diameter of whatever you're trying to wire. So with aluminum, I'm talking about aluminum wire. So if I want to wire a, you know, pencil sized branch, I need to wire with half the size of a pencil. Okay. Well, with clip and grow, or anytime we're going to be leaving wire on something that's growing vigorously, we need to be wiring with 2/3 or the diameter of the branch we're trying to wire and move. And I know that stinks. It's not fun to wire with big wire, but the reasoning is that we need to leave it on long enough that it can set without cutting in. So if it cuts in and we have to pull that wire off, then the branch is gonna flop down. It's not gonna be set, and we're gonna have to rewire it, and we're gonna have cut in that we didn't need to have happen. If we wire with thicker wire, it takes longer to cut in, and by that period of time, we have more meat on the branch, more likely to have set, less likely that we have to rewire, and less likely that we have cut it. So you want to try to wire with that bigger proportion wire. Okay. This also allows us to move growth a lot safer. It's a lot easier to make big twisty bends and tight bends with big wire and proper wire that's not underwired than it is when you're trying to do it with something that's, you know, almost there. So when do we break branches? We break branches when we are bending them, and we bend the branch and we bend it and we get it right where we want it, but it's not quite holding. So we go a little further than that, and then it springs almost to where we want it. So we say, okay, I got it. If I go twice as far and I bend it twice as far as I need to, that's when we break it. It's because we're trying to overcompensate. So if you're not having to overcompensate and the branch stays where you put it, then you're less likely to break the branch by trying to double down on your strength to get it where you want it. So there's a lot of benefits to trying to wire with bigger wire. So now let's just talk through this guy. This is our kind of entry slide, that Prna that was in the red pot. And we'll kind of walk through how I started this guy. I don't unfortunately have anything before this, and I think I'm missing the picture right after this, but this was kind of what I started with. I selected this tree for training as a cutting because it had a nice nabari. I basically said, okay, this is going to be worth kind of developing more of that nabari, and nothing else really remarkable about it, just material. And so this was one of two wires I used on this whole project, where I wired out one of the first branches off to the left, and then you can see I have nothing else to the tree. So I do make a cut from this point to this point. I do make a cut, and then I regrow whatever I kind of sprouted from there. And so we're going to basically start the progression from here. And this is where things will start to make sense. But you can see on that first branch that we left, so if I go from here to here, you'll see that I am actually already divided. This comes out and divides to 2 over here, and then divides again to 4 over here. So this branch is already making progress. And all these other branches are going to be my side branches that I'm growing and running to thicken. So the strong growth of the plant is used in this stage. The first branch on the design has divided several times, with the top of the tree is left to run to thicken the entire design. So think wherever you run branches, wherever you run them, you're thickening directly below that branch. So if I run something from the highest part of the tree, I'm thickening the whole trunk line. If I run something from the first branch of the tree, I'm only thickening the first third of the tree. So the branches thicken whatever is beneath them, whatever is lower on the kind of growing totem pole. So this is our first kind of cut of that main apex, and you can see what we're going into. These are our 2 branches that we're selecting. Here is one already exists on this side and one already exists on this side. And all I need to do is take this meat out to where they meet. But I don't want to do that yet because I don't want to disturb their growth. So I'm going to wait a little bit of time until they emerge and get to about 3-4 inches, and then I'll take that meat out. So you can see the difference where I make that cut. Okay, so this is where I finally took the meat out as those branches started to emerge. And you can see several divides are starting to occur. So if we look at this one here, I think I actually maybe have a better one. No, so you'll see this branch here off to the right is starting to divide in the next slide. We cut it back to this part. This one's starting to divide, and a lot of our stuff is starting to divide into our pairs of 2s. Now, cut paste is always applied. Always apply cut paste at these wounds. Cut paste is important for more than just healing the wound quickly. It's good for keeping pests out of the wound and keeping bacteria and viruses and things like that out of the wound. And so if you leave those uncovered, then you can get borers, you get all kinds of issues. And so it's just good practice to leave it covered, aside from the healing aspects of it. Okay, so here's where we make another cut. You can see where things have thickened near the top, and we had to make a decision. One of those 2 branches is going to be a top, and one of those 2 branches is going to be a side branch. So I wanted to go with, it made the most sense kind of initially to go with this branch first to be the top. But what would have happened is I felt like that would have carried me too far away, slanting in the opposite direction to the first branch. And I really wanted it more in line with that first branch. So I decided to slow this down. And even though this was growing under this, I decided to grow it to a big enough proportion that it would eventually be on top. And so that looks like this in a second. So you can see already it's starting to grow and start to become the top. And our next buds that we're going to select, I already start to pre-anticipate my next move. So when I'm doing this, as you're running these branches out, they're going to start back budding on their own. And a lot of times they're going to back bud in the areas that we need them next. So you'll see on a lot of species of trees that, oh, hey, my elm already has a pair of buds right where I intend to cut it. And they just happen to be there because I'm running the branch out. And so a lot of times you want to kind of pre-plan, okay, as soon as this gets this thick, I'm going to make this cut. And so that's exactly what I do here is as soon as this wound at the top fully heals, I made this cut and allowed this to continue running. And now once this guy starts to divide a little bit and I get this a little thicker, I'll go ahead and cut this and bring those two branches up. And that looks like this. You can see now this is starting to emerge and ready to be cut. So now this is the point where we start to refine the tree. Once we have passed the point of dividing the top a few times, we then enter the tree into refinement. This is where slow, controlled growth is desired. And first, the tree was potted into a medium of akadama, pumice, and river sand. So I don't use akadama except in refinement. That's the only time I use akadama. So if I'm growing a tree out and I'm trying to grow it fast, I don't use akadama. Think of akadama as your refinement amendment. It is used to kind of to hold more moisture and slow the plant's growth. So when I'm ready for refinement, I start adding in a typical akadama blend. And I also do any root work that was bothering me. So if you look, this had some really ugly roots here, and I just cut those back, stub those back. So the formula of dividing branches from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and so on is followed all the way into refinement. I never deviate from that. I go through all these fine branches and I still pick out pairs of twos. So we continually prune for tighter, denser growth, all the while dividing branches into pairs. So as the tree progresses further into refinement, the tree is again potted down and the medium made finer. Essentially, sifting soil down to just above fines gives a medium suitable for trees with many branches and small containers. So as I continue to pot down and I continue to need as I continue to have more branches pulling on that soil mass, and the soil mass is getting smaller, I need to start thinking of other ways to hold moisture. So I sift down to smaller particle size.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Does this technique work for conifers?
Pines. It works for pines.
It doesn't.
Yeah, it works really, really well for pines. It will be a kind of a slower process than you're used to, especially if you're being like very by the books, cutting back for hard bifurcation. But I have a friend of mine that's apprenticing at Aichian Bonsai in Japan. And one of the things he was telling me was that there are certain artists are cutting 40-year-old black pine growth off to regrow in this methodology, even though it's slower, because it's more natural than a wired branch. You get a kind of more natural look than having this kind of wired flow to the system. So I don't know. I think it is usable for conifers. I think it's best used for broadleaf.
And how about boxwoods? Would work.
Boxwood's perfect. Yeah, works great for boxwoods. And just think though, there will be some trees that are better healers than other. And so if it's not a good healer, there is no other way around the algorithm than having to thicken the branch to half the thickness of the wound you made. There's no other way around it. You can't, if I have a bougainvilleas are really, really poor healers. And people swear, they're like, you cannot heal trunk wounds. And I swear, yes, you can, but you have to be set up the right way. And if I have two branches on the opposite side of the wounds, it is an inevitability. If the shoulders of those branches get so wide that they touch, the wound will be gone. It can't exist in the same space as the two branches. So if those branches, if their circumference gets so big that the wound gets swallowed up, well, you healed the wound. So the trick is certain species, you will have to grow them to that size. There is no like, oh, the tree will heal some of it for you, like a maple. A maple will heal a lot, do a lot of the work for you. A crepe will do a lot of the work for you. Bougainvillea won't. Ilex will not. A lot of ficus will not. So, there are certain trees that if you're not getting two branches and getting them at opposite sides of the wounds, you're never going to heal the wounds. So, and we're going to look at that. I have some really good documentation here in this next slide that's going to show you guys why it's important to kind of think of wound closure first and foremost rather than later, because it's a pain in the ass later. It's a big, 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 big pain. So sometimes big cuts are unavoidable, and so having a good plan to grow the tree and heal the wound after cutting is essential. The best front to this water jasmine, according to the Nabari, required the removal of the large second trunk growing to the left of the main trunk. Any other long, straight, or boring branches are cut to just below where they begin to lack taper or movement. And the tree was also bare rooted and planted into an 8-inch bulb pan container with coarse bonsai mix with no akadama at this stage. And so that's what this looked like, was I went from this to this. That was the start of my algorithm. And so you'll see there's several kind of key areas that are helpful. The wound is to the back. So I've got the wound to the back, and we will work on the wound and try our best to heal it. It's not in the greatest position to heal, but we should make some good progress on it. And so I have some close-up pics of that as we go forward. But you can see that this branch here has already divided nicely into two. So my first branch is already bifurcating. Come up to this main trunk line here, and we've already got a back branch on this side of the wound, and we've got a main leader on this side of the wound. And so we've got some elements to the tree that save us time.
Mike, can you use your cursor, go back if you don't mind?
Yeah.
I'm a little dense, and go to the original tree on the left and point out the branches on each tree.
So that's going to be tough. So if you think about this trunk here,
yeah,
the
that's
wound,
in the back.
That's in the back. Yeah. So the Nabari, so you can almost see this root here is now to this side.
Okay.
And so that's why it's hard to kind of see what's been cut. So all of this stuff has been removed basically. And I kept one of these main trunk lines to be an apex. And then basically kept one stub or one little branch off of this, and everything else was cleaned and pasted. But my main wound, the main issue, was this giant trunk over here that had to be removed. And so I do have some good pics of the kind of close-up of the wound. I don't have good pics of kind of the cut from the side. I should have thought of that.
Okay.
So this shows kind of the next growth phase is basically as I'm pruning things, I run the two branches from the wound site, and I continue to run them until they heal the wound beneath them. And so there's several areas on this tree where I'm running pairs of branches, and I'm not concerned with how the tree looks. I'm not concerned with, oh, it doesn't look like a bonsai, because I'm going for a goal. I'm not going to have a museum piece right away. I have a goal in mind. I want a tree that does not have trunk wounds. And so in order to get that quickly, I have to put off having what I want for a while. And so that's what this is. This is running this out and growing the most efficient way of growing it, not the prettiest way, the most efficient way. So as we grow it out, once we start really cutting this back hard, we start building in that ramification very, very quickly. And so that's the other thing is when I tell you how long this project took right here, I'm going to show you, I think it's in the next slide. Here, okay, water jasmine project, April 2021 to November 2022. So didn't take long. I put it in a big pot. I followed all the rules. I followed the algorithm to a T. I watered it appropriately and I babied it. And basically I got fast results very quickly. And so that can be done innumerable times. And so you'll see that tree just goes back from there to there to there to there.
Is this tree growing all year round?
No, it
Because you're
doesn't.
in
It stops
Florida?
growing. It stops growing about I'd say realistically, these guys don't grow past November and they don't wake up again till about April. So we do have a cutoff. It's not like now we do have a longer growing season than, people up north, but not all of our tropicals grow year round. We have a lot of them that are equatorial trees. And so these are trees that come from Indonesia, Vietnam, areas that are much more tropical and don't have seasons at all. And so if they get any kind of change in temperature, they slow down and they stop growing. So these guys are one of them. They don't grow, terribly well during the winter, and usually they defoliate completely. So this one off to the left, this is how they look in winter in Florida. They don't grow or do anything.
I have a question. What is the
Sure.
proportion of tree girth, width, height to the pot size?
To this pot size?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Trunk width proportion. Let me think that through. What is the trunk width proportion to the pot size?
General,
Oh,
the
I see what
question
they're
was in
saying. I
general.
gotcha. The pot size, it's about I'd say tree is about 8 inches tall, and the pot is probably about 1.5 inches thick. I should have probably taken a picture of it finished. I don't think I have that. No, I don't have a zoomed out pic, but I think that's what they were asking. It's like a key food tree. So not a shohin, it's the next size up from shohin. And so this is what's important. I want to show this, okay? So in that time period, we went from April 2021 to November 2022, right? So this is the biggest wound, the one to the back. This wound was literally like bigger than a 50-cent piece, bigger than a 50-cent piece. And so it's not fully healed, but you can see the tissue crawls all the way over to here and all the way over to here, okay? And this is the one in the top of the tree. This was about the size of a quarter. It's fully healed, the size of a quarter. Now keep that in mind because that's going to be important for the next slide. This is one of my oldest trees. I've had this tree since 2009. Okay. So what, 15 years? I still have the original trunk wounds on it. That's about the size of a quarter, or it was the size of a quarter. And in 15 years in refinement, it hasn't grown squat. And this is another one in the top of the tree, 15 years, and it's still on the tree. So why is it that I would almost got the wounds completely gone in less than 2 years, and in 15 years, I can't budge these wounds? And that's because once we get into refinement, depending on species, you won't be able to make a lot of big changes. And so people always ask me, especially in Florida, people always say, I want to grow trees fast. I want to grow trees. I don't want to wait forever. But they also don't like the answer of, well, you can't have it in a bonsai pot then. You've got to think about the efficiency of growing this quickly, And so that's why I talk a lot about the efficient way of growing isn't the pretty way of growing.
I have a question of what is
Sure.
your initial soil mix? Do you have any organics?
Yes. I do two things. So a lot of times I just will grow them out in organic potting soil for about a year. But if I'm going to do it by the book, if I want to really like that water jasmine, this water jasmine was by the book. And so what I did was I grew it in this kind of media here, which was lava, expanded shale, and a little bit of pine bark. And so very, very coarse mix. I could water it every single day as heavy as I want and really very low odds of overwatering the tree. So that's really, really good for growing trees fast. because think of it like this. A tree will grow quickest if it hits a wet dry cycle. And I'll explain this. If I take a baseball sized core of roots and I put it in a big 5-gallon bucket and I water that twice a day, well, those roots never go anywhere. They stay right in that spot because they have everything they need. And likewise, the tree doesn't need to grow because it's not being outcompeted. It's getting light, it's getting water, it's getting everything. So growth is very slow. Why grow? If it starts to dry out, that's what'll cause it to grow, because now all of a sudden, as if that central core of roots starts to dry out, that tree is now given a choice. It can either seek out moisture or it can die. And it doesn't want to die, so it's going to seek out moisture, and it's going to start going into that new potting medium, and it's going to start exploring that. And while it explores that, that's going to correspond to growth at the top of the tree. This is known as the wet dry cycle. This is important in development and important to get trees growing vigorously. Now, with that said, if I told you I want to keep the tree growing super slow, then what do we need to do? We need to keep the tree wet. We need to keep it in akadama. We need to keep it in a mix that holds a lot of water. And so that will keep it growing slower than a mix that's free draining. And so if I'm doing it by the book, long story, I know you asked a very easy question, but if I'm doing it by the book, I want to go into a coarse bonsai mix with good wet dry cycle.
Okay.
Good questions. Okay, we're almost done. And then we'll just look at some live examples and whatnot. Okay, so Beauty Berry acquired February 2021. This is Japanese Beauty Berry. This was the first thing I did, up potted to a larger container, removed any unwanted branches, added some high nitrogen fertilizer, and then the tree is allowed to grow strong while I routinely remove undesirable growth and balance the tree. So this was my first, this was after a year of growing it. This is what I got after a year. So not super impressive, but from that to that, not bad. And you can see I've got several divides. So this comes out, it was cut here and then divided here and here. And then this was cut here and divided here and here. And so we're starting to get some divides. And shortly thereafter, we start to really start picking up speed. And so you'll get a clearer view of the tree here, kind of how it's built staggered. And this was after only about 2 years, I think. And finally, a Grewia. Grewia occidentalis, or lavender starflower. This is also a tropical, but like a subtropical, so would do well for you guys in California. But the same sort of thing, as I make my first cuts, I start planning my algorithm. Where am I going to start making my twos? And you'll see this only took a year, 1 year to make this tree from a $25 piece of pre-bonsai. And 1 year to kind of get it into refinement. And now this is where I want you guys to see is each of the staggered cuts. So we got our first cut here, which didn't do anything for progress. This is where progress started to be made, was we make one cut, 25% healed here, 75% here, another cut, 25% here, 75% here, another cut hidden here, and we just keep following that same algorithm. Okay, and this one's a little different in that I did wire the trunk a lot. And I did kind of mix the theories of kind of wiring as I go, running things out, wire it again, run it out, wire it out, and kind of continually grow this out. Now, this took 2 years to build this from a small cutting like that into like a pretty gargantuan tree. And I did go into a big bonsai pot, or a big grow pot. And so I did get very, very quick growth. And so it developed very, very rapidly. Okay. So that is the end of the PowerPoint portion of it, I guess. And so now let's go, if you guys have any questions or anything like that. I do have some live examples that I did want to kind of talk about that I want to see if I can pin this camera.
You're going to do that?
Yeah, let me see.
You stop your presentation?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Do that. Okay. Okay, so can everybody, or can you see the tree that I'm kind of pointing at right now?
Yeah, I can make it bigger if you'd like. Do you want to?
Right now, it looks like it's the
It looks
main
good
image
to
for
me.
me. Yeah. So you guys can see this is a tree that was made under this same kind of algorithm. And you can see the original cut is all the way in here. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it better from this side. All right, so this is what I meant was in this tree here, we can see right where those two branches meet over here. This is right around where that first cut was made. And then again, healed this 25% on this side and 75% on that side and continued with that algorithm. So this tree is pretty much, it has some superficial wounds and whatnot, but no major trunk wounds. And it's now basically finished. Now, some of the things that I did want to really drive home are like this guy. Okay, here's one. Let's see, let me just get this up a little bit. Okay. Okay, so now this is one that I've been working on for a while. And you can see this is what I mean. This is my initial trunk cut that I did not get two. I got one. So I went 1 for 1. Okay. And so you can see I did that 2 times. I have 2 different wounds here. I'll point them out. I got one here and I've got one here. And then I got my 2. So I've got 3 wounds on here. And now I want you guys to realistically tell me, is there any difference in taper from here to here? Here to here? Not really.
No.
They're almost the same. And what I'm getting at is that one cut healing that wound, I had to grow the same exact diameter as what I cut off, and I made no progress. So I only then started making tapered progress when I got my division of 2. And so now I'm starting to make progress with the tree. And now if I rotate it around, you can see this is one I've also done root work to. So I've been like kind of correcting the nabari as we go. And now we'll get to the wound here where you can see I've got my divide over here. My first branch is nice and divided, and I'm waiting on this. This just needs to heal a little bit more before I make my next cut. Okay, and my next cut will probably be down to here, and I'll start growing this and this bud out. Yeah, I'll probably do that one. Definitely this one, and all that'll go, and I'll start building my next stage. Okay. But it's important
Where would you prune on the smaller branches?
Oh, I would go all the way back. Let me get it to where you guys can see well. Okay. So these guys would be pruned all the way back to 1 or 2 nodes. So they come back to here. This one comes back to here, right here. And then we're looking to bring 2 branches out from here and 2 branches out from here. Okay. Let's go to another one. Okay. All right, lower this down a little bit. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is one that's not, I just made some cuts to this guy not too long ago to kind of start building out the next section. So this is a good one to really see. Is you can see my first cut back here. So my first cut was made right there. And you can see I've healed it completely. It's gone. So that cut doesn't exist anymore. I grew my first big branch over here. I got my leader over there. Now this one I did do a tricky little thing. I did a thread graft to get my back branch. So I did thread graft this on. But this part is again a divide to 2, where this one was allowed to grow to 75% diameter and this one to 25. And now I'm starting to do the same thing here, bring another one off to the side. But you can see where I've made these cuts, you can see I'm starting to get my 2 buds, 1, 2. So I'll cut this end back as those start to elongate, and I'll bring those 2 out. And likewise on this side, I've got my other part of that bifurcation. I've got 1 bud there, and maybe the other bud I can choose. Whoops, hang on. I can choose either this bud or I could choose this bud here. And this is the better bud right there. So I'd clip that all the way back to those two buds there. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. All right. And so a few more. And so this is oftentimes how they start. You know, they really do, especially if I'm growing like a mame, they start like this, like getting one wound and getting a branch that's directly off to the side and a branch up here. Now, these didn't emerge this way. I basically made a cut higher up and I cut to the lowest two that I could. I basically took the meat out between the lowest two that I could find because I wanted to make a really big mame. That's the goal for this guy, make a fat mame. And so starting that process very, very early on and just starting to build it up like we saw in the algorithm. And so the mames, think the size of the project dictates how long it's going to take. Like this is that little mame that we showed in the slide. And you can see this one took a year to make and to this point, and I still have some work to do on it. I need to get this bud to elongate out and become another part of the pad because this is only a division of 1. It's not a 1 to 2. It's just a 1 to 1. And so I need this bud here. This is a very important bud to come out and be my 1 to 2. And so using that algorithm, 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, it's almost like you'll never get pigeonholed into, well, what do I do with the tree now? You got to just analyze the work. Where are your divides at? Where do you need to add more ramification? Is it going 1 to 1 or is it going to 1 to 2? That tells you where your next area of work is, where your next area of focus should be. So these guys are a great way to learn it, is making fast little mames because they don't take a lot of time and you can just bang them out quick. And then if you like the process, you know, you can either grow a bigger tree from cutting, or what's even better is if you buy a tree that is already saves you time, that maybe has 2 years worth of this algorithm under it, and you just got to like add another 2 years, or maybe it's got 3 years and you just add 1 year, something like that. You know, that's what I try to explain to a lot of people about purchasing material is you shouldn't purchase material just because you want a certain species or anything like that, unless you're going to propagate it, because oftentimes you should be purchasing it for what's going to save you time. What is further along that's not going to add more flaws to your life and more work to your life, but what is actually going to save you from having to grow a cutting for 2 years? What is going to save you algorithm wise and get you to stage 3 quicker? You know, things like that are things we want to think about when purchasing material. So when I purchase material now, I look for things that have big trunk wounds that are healed already. So if like my first trunk wound is already healed, that's huge. That's huge for me. If I get the second wound healed as well, that's, man, I take my money. So this is the one from the slides. So you guys can see he's still developing very, very nicely, but we can really see that structure. Now this was grown with 2 wires. So again, there's a lot of people that feel sometimes that wiring is very daunting. They don't want to get into wiring. I can't promise you that this is any less daunting, but I can tell you if you are incapable of wiring for whatever reason, this does not mean it doesn't mean you can't make super high quality bonsai.
I had a question about winter protection on your tropicals.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Honestly, I try and keep them above 40 degrees. Is like that's when most of my tropicals will start experiencing some degree of damage at about 40 degrees. And I try to keep them out of prolonged periods of 50 degrees, under 50 degrees. So like if there's 2 weeks of weather coming where it's going to be 50 or below, I try and bring them in at night at least. And it's my favorite ones. Winter protection, winter is always, always, always a burden for tropical growers. Even here in Florida, it's our least favorite time. So what I tend to do is during hard freezes, we suck it up, and most of us bring trees either indoors, put them in a greenhouse and heat them. But you cannot leave them out and just cover them. That's not a super safe method. So
When you refer to 40 degrees, you mean nighttime lows?
nighttime, yeah, nighttime lows, yeah. So if because think like depending on species, different tropicals can handle more than others. But like this Prna here does not like 40 degrees. If he sits out in 40 degrees, he will look really, really bad. And if he sits out in a freeze, I'll likely have dead branches. And if he has multiple nights of freezing, then I'll probably lose the tree.
And you said this is a Prna?
Prna, yeah.
I haven't heard of that. Is that?
It's a very popular tropical bonsai, so used a lot in like Taiwan, Indonesia. It's up there. I'd say it's as popular for bonsai as ficus, or what's another famous tropical, bougainvillea. It's up there with those guys. So one more, well, two more, three more, sorry, three more, and then and if you guys have any questions, feel free to.
Well, I did have a question is, what do you do if the buds below your chop do not produce branches in the direction you want?
Oh, I was hoping I'd get that question. The reality is, you have two options. This is kind of what makes clip and grow fun and kind of doesn't. Is you can either recut again, okay, and try to get the buds in the orientation that you want. Or you live with what it gave you and you make the best of it. And it's a dice roll. I can't tell you that one way. There are times where I just say, you know what, I've already cut it 2 times. I didn't get what I want. I need to just, this is what it gave me. I got to work with it. Or maybe you've cut the tree so low that you don't have another node to cut back to, and that was your last shot. Well, at that point, you have to just go with what it gave you and make the best of it. And you have to find ingenuity and be creative in how you kind of approach those problems, how you're going to get around them. Do you need to ground layer roots on at a different angle? Maybe there's different fixes. Maybe just growing the proportion big enough will reorient the front. There's various things that you'll have to think of, but usually it starts with recutting and trying to see if I can't encourage them to grow on the same thing. I also practice a lot of grafting. I do a lot of grafting. So if I don't get like this, where was it? I think this tree I've grafted things. Okay. So you can see in here, right at the tip of my index finger, I've grafted 2 branches, one here and one here on this opposite sides of this wound so that I can better heal that wound. And so I use grafting. They didn't appear there naturally. I think I had one there maybe. And so I made sure to get the other one on the other side of that wound, and by grafting it in. So there's a lot of ways that you can get around that. But it does happen. And the last thing that you do is, if you're growing a lot of material, so like me, if I'm growing 30 of these a year and I've got a table of 30, well, then I just allot a certain amount that are going to be duds. And can they be fixed? Sure. But I'm growing so many that usually I don't bother. And I just say, okay, moving on to the ones that are better set up. And I put my time into that. And so it depends on where you're at. If you're still learning a lot of these advanced techniques, then put the time in, do a ground layer. What have you got to lose? You need to learn the technique anyway. But if you're growing a ton of material, you don't need to sit and save every little piece, then just move forward. It's a dud. You didn't put years into it. You put like a month or 2 into it before you realize that the first cut didn't work out. And so you move on. So those are kind of your approaches that you can take with this, but it does happen. You cut and it doesn't work out like it does in the pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got several questions here before you
Sure.
get to this one.
Yeah.
Do you still use this same method with the large bougainvillea? I guess they seem to rot when cuts are larger than a quarter.
They do tend to rot out, and that's the problem. One of the reasons, like, why is this so important to heal wounds is that it's about the longevity of the plant. So if I was in Japan and I was an investor and you said, all right, Mike, here's $20,000, go buy me a maple that's going to be a good investment for our lobby, our hotel lobby. Okay. And I go and I see two $20,000 maples, and one has a big trunk chop on it and one doesn't. Every single time I'm buying the one that doesn't have the trunk chop. Even if the one with the trunk chop looks cooler, it might have other things that are better, that cool branching, better ramification. I will still pick the one that has the fully healed trunk, because I know that in 10 years, in 20 years, I'm not going to come back to a fraction of the tree that I had. And so that's what tends to happen with bougainvilleas is in Florida, nobody really practices wound healing. And so most of the bougainvilleas here have a shelf life. They're going to rot out. And when they do, they're going to fall apart, and you're going to end up with like shards of the tree. And so I will now tell you honestly, is I'm hesitant to work on collected bougainvillea unless I see that the wounds have been well cared for. They are in good positions to potentially heal someday, or otherwise I'm filled with confidence that I'm not going to lose the tree. So I'm not a big fan of just taking any bougainvillea stump and working on it. To me, it's a waste of time. It's honestly, it's like a waste of time and effort. So where I do like to see bougainvillea used is grow them from cutting and grow it so that it doesn't have a trunk wound, and then you don't have to worry about it. You know, a lot of these ones that you'll see in Taiwan that are winning shows and stuff like that are flawless bougainvilleas. And they were grown from cutting and basically have just been grown so that the wounds healed before moving forward at any particular stage. So, yeah, there's no real good solution for the rotting of the bogey other than treating with wood hardeners and things like that. And you're still on that inevitable kind of, that is the destiny of the bougainvillea. It will end up hollowed out. So.
Okay. Another question is, would you ever allow 3 branches to set at thirds on your first cut to heal the wound quicker?
No, because the problem with that is you're already, because of the way you're healing and the rate of growth, you're already running the risk that even with just 2 branches, you can still get some degree of reverse taper. We kind of discussed that it's acceptable reverse taper, but 3 will create like an uneven thickening. Think you have 3 branches all meeting at one point, and now you're not going to get 50% down one side of the trunk and 50% down the other side of the trunk. You're going to get 1/3, and a third meeting right in the middle. And so at focal points in that one spot, and you'll get a swelling. And so typically I'm really super anal about cleaning out the tubes. And a lot of the guys, when I just traveled with Laurent, the cosmic bonsai guy, this year. We did a lot of traveling, and I had an epiphany moment. It really was kind of like this aha moment, because I watched him kind of walking around teaching other students, talking about his cosmic style, and they kept asking him, they said, well, how do I prep this to be a cosmic bonsai? And he said, oh, the same way you prep it to be a Japanese bonsai. You're gonna thin it down to 2s, yada yada yada. And honestly, I finally realized, I don't know why I didn't realize it sooner, but all the work is going to be the same starting out. So you're working on a juniper, you're working on anything, you cannot have clusters of branches forever. You might be able to use 3 at a point for a certain amount of time, but if you're going for like efficiency and you don't want to have to go back and redo work and stuff like that, it's thinning down to 2s at every juncture of the way is good work for thinning things out and getting them cleaned out on any tree. And then you do your styling. It's almost like, why style with stuff that you don't even know you're going to be able to keep long term? If you thin everything to 2s first, then whatever style you pick, windswept, weeping, cosmic, anything, it doesn't matter. You'll know that the work is sound and will last a long period of time. So I think that's why we're very precise about keeping it pared down to twos.
Okay.
Mhm.
What is your preferred grafting type?
Ooh, great question. I use 4 different grafts in my repertoire. Realistically, I use an approach grafts, thread grafts, cleft grafts, and veneer grafts. And so that'll even break down to 2 grafts. So I'll break that down to 2 different theories. Is you have grafts, 2 grafts that have roots attached to them that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to do anything but put them in and wait. And then you have the grafts that you are cutting a piece off of the tree and putting it somewhere else. And so there's 2 of those. So 2 and 2. And the approach graft and the thread graft are useful in some scenarios where you have to have the branch make it. You don't get a second shot at putting the graft in. You really need that graft to set. Approach graft, thread grafts are really good about that because they not realistically going to fail, and if they do fail, you can just try again at the same site. With scion grafting, you are putting all your eggs in one basket, and so you are kind of you're doing it with a very good educated guess, but you are a lot of times cutting the tree back to the last node on the tree so that you don't get a second shot. If the graft fails, you either need to regraft again quickly, or you just missed all that work is gone and you have to regrow that section of the branch. So the scion grafting is faster to get your results, but riskier. And so I'll say that during certain times of the year, I tend to gravitate towards scion grafting when I feel it's safer and I feel that I can get away with it better. And certain times of the year, I will do approach grafts and thread grafts more often. It's also dictated by the branch position I need. So those 4 grafts are going to be really what you need to have in your arsenal. Not to do bonsai. You don't have to know any grafts to do bonsai, but I'll tell you, if you're following the algorithm, then this is part of your toolkit to keep you on track, to have less duds so that, hey, that one only gave me 1 branch. Okay, graft in another branch. You save yourself from having to do a recut. And so there's several things. It's not going to fix everything, but it is a really usable tool. You pair that with ground layering, you pair that with some of the other techniques we were talking about, and now you can get any material out of any kind of bind. Your dud count has dropped significantly if you're willing to do the work. So they are useful and very, very good to have in your skill set. And that's something that, if you guys want to do one of these programs next year or whatnot, I do have a really similar program, like similar kind of structure that's all on the different types of grafting, how we would use it. I can even do a live example. So just something to consider.
Excellent. I had someone
Yeah,
ask if you can use the clip and grow method on wisteria.
absolutely. Absolutely. So it'll work just about on any broadleaf tree. It's best, like it's probably the easiest to understand on opposite growers first. So if you have something that pairs off branches right 2 at a node, that's going to be the easiest. Now, if it's alternate, it's still pretty easy. You just have to slant your wound, like sometimes pretty severely, so that you're catching the edge of the 2 buds. So if one bud is higher than the other, that means you got a slant cut from a high point to a low point, and you've got to kind of catch the buds that way. But ultimately, it will work on just about any broadleaf tree. I haven't found a broadleaf tree that I've been like, I don't want to do that on that. So.
Good.
Mhm.
And somebody asked, what is this species of the tree in front of us?
This is a sea hibiscus, red stem sea hibiscus, also very popular in the tropics. And this is one that has been grafted over to a smaller cultivar. And we will get a lot more work done on this and reduce this significantly more. We just need another year of growth. We got the grafting done last year and then let everything settle. And now we need about another year to just refine and ramify the grafts. But this is a tree that was grown. It was wired and grown under the clip and grow kind of methodology to have huge proportions. So you can see it was twisted and wired and then grown in a relatively big pot to get this growth. And I have this documented, time stamped on Instagram, 1 year. So from like a small cutting to this in 1 year's time. And so I've had it a little longer than that, but it hasn't changed much. The trunk has been like this for a few years now. So, so that's something to consider as well. Okay.
More
Yeah,
questions.
sure.
They're coming, keep coming. One
Awesome.
person said, presentation on grafting would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Question on slant cut versus flat on alternating. If you don't see the nodes below the cut, is flat cut preferred until the buds reveal their locations?
100%. Great,
Yeah.
great question. Great question. That's 100% it. It's always a flat cut until the buds present themselves, because you don't know how they're going to bud out. And if you slant cut, think of it as you're limiting your options. So you're lessening some of the options that you could get, and you're putting all your eggs in one basket. And if it doesn't emerge on the tip of that wedge, then you got to cut all that off again as well. So you're going further back than you maybe need to by slant cutting before you get the buds. So great question, 100%. And did you have another one?
Not yet.
Okay. So yeah, so this is that Grewia, or that lavender starflower that you guys can see. But you can see this first wound. Because I didn't have the second wound, or the second branch on the other side, is I didn't get it fully healed. I would have had to have grown this main trunk to the same size. It would have been the same size as this to get that healed with just one. However, when I go into the other ones, you'll see like each area is fully healed. Like this divide to 2 here is fully healed here. It's fully healed in here, and fully healed to the final one in here. I don't even think you guys can see that, but each place again only took a year from material, from like a pre-bonsai to get to that, and you're just churning them out. And so this used no wire. I've never wired this tree, so never. And so again, it's really for growing batches of trees. If you wanted to grow like, hey, I want to grow 15 really sweet trees, this algorithm is imperative. You can start them all out at the same time, prune them all at the same time, and grow them as like batches, and get them into like routine work. And so that'll help you learn a lot too. The more trees you grow and the more you kind of practice these techniques, the faster you'll kind of cut your teeth on inexpensive material, and then not be hesitant to buy more expensive material and work on more expensive material, because now you're super confident in what you want to do with it. So it's kind of win-win. I like I said at the beginning of the program, is ever since I've discovered this method of doing it, I've never once even hinted at going back the other direction. Never even came close. So it's and I would say my bonsai has been 8 years of doing it one way, and like 8 or 9 years of doing it another way. And so it's so profoundly different that it changed everything.
I have to admit, the prior tree that you had up there in your comment, that was a pretty large pot.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah.
that big to me, but someone was asking about how large of a pot would a tree need to be to kind of equal growing in the ground. I don't know how you.
Well, and so don't think of it like that. Think of it like you want it to be relatively large for the project size. So if I'm trying to grow a mame, I don't need to grow it in the ground. I don't even need to grow it in a 5-gallon or anything like that. I need to grow it like a 1-gallon or an 8-inch bulb pan is fine for that project.
Yeah.
If I want to grow like a large tree, that's when the ground really comes into play. Is if you want to grow something 30 inches or something like that, then the ground is going to save you so much time. But if I was going to grow a project like that and I wanted to put it in a similar size pot, probably a 5-gallon to a 10-gallon, depending on the size of the tree. And that still won't be 100% the same as the ground. It'll just be similar. And think there's nothing wrong with container growing. I don't like growing in the ground for numerous reasons. I don't like nematodes. I don't like having to deal with nematodes after I dig something up, and I also hate nematodes. So those 3 reasons are why I don't like growing in the ground. That's really it. It's just the nematodes. But growing in a pot, you get slightly slower growth, but you never have to deal with those kind of pest issues or anything like that. And once you've grown a tree for 5 years and had to cut every root off of it and lose half the tree because of nematodes, you lose your taste for wanting to grow in the ground really fast. So I like pots. I like big pots. Yep. And I think I have one more I just wanted to talk about. Okay, this one. All right. So what do you do if you already have a tree that's in a bonsai pot and you potted it early? Okay, let's say you're not in a big pot. You don't want to go backwards and have to like undo everything you did. You double pot it. You put it in a second pot where it has additional soil inside of it, and it can root through the bottom and start to grow like it's in a bigger pot. And so that's a method I'll use on certain things where maybe I don't want to go backwards. Maybe I just need a little bit more oomph to the design and finish out a few more details. Or maybe it's something where a key branch died and I do need vigor back in the tree to fix what I did. Well, that's where like double potting or something like that, getting an additional volume of soil under the tree will allow for these runs. And allow for those runs safely so that you can leave the house and water it one time and not worry about it. But this is another clip and grow one where we made our initial cut here at the top. That's kind of healed there. This is going to be branch number 1, which is still thickening. And this is actually going to be my top. So this is going to be my top here. And this is going to be my next branch. So that's the other thing about clip and grow is you have to kind of get good at holding your place mentally. So you can't really see clearly what's going to be the top and what's the side. But in my mind, after doing this so long, I can extrapolate on the next 3 or 4 moves, and I know where that top's going to end up, roughly. And so you'll get better at kind of seeing things forward and starting to make those decisions before they even occur. So like before I even get the buds, I already kind of know where I'm going to cut it. I already know what direction I'm taking it. I already know what's going to be my top, what's going to be the sides. So things like that. And yeah, so I think that's mostly it. And I don't think I have anything else with me. Yeah, so that's all the trees I brought in for now. Do you guys, I mean, I always can go get more, but are there any questions out there right now?
Not at the one person asked if you could go back to the beauty berry slide.
And there's areas like I had to make some corrections on this afterwards. So like this top is, I think I ended up cutting all the way back down to, hang on, let me get into here so you guys can see better. So when he asks, I'll come back to that one. I'm just going to finish my thought on this guy real quick. Is there are several areas, that were kind of erroneous. So this top area came all the way down to here. I had to come back down to there. I don't remember where this is growing. I don't know that I would have left that right from the crotch like that, but maybe I did. Yeah, I guess I did. So that's something that I think I ended up removing finally as well. And then there's some like clutter in here that I always thin out. So if you don't get to it right away, I usually do like a heavy policing of my branches once a year. Like, so if I've kind of built some stuff out, if it gets dense like this and I'm not able to really get in there and look at the 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, once a year I need to go in and check the branches and kind of get it thinned out and look at all this and clean out the meat. So, that's this unfortunately is that picture right before the clean out. So.
And
But
Mike said that the slide he was was the one with the information. I'm assuming it's with your
oh,
website.
okay,
Oh, is
gotcha,
this
gotcha,
it?
gotcha. This
Is
must be
this the
it.
information, Mike?
Yeah, he was talking about the beauty berry one. So,
That's the
no-
one he said. Yeah.
okay, perfect. Yeah, so it wasn't much to it, just kind of getting us into the habit of how do we start trees out? So, okay, I just bought material. What do I do with it? Your first order of business is make sure it has enough soil to grow the project so that we're in big enough soil. Make sure that you've eliminated any branches you do not want growing fast and strong, and make sure that you've fed the tree appropriately. And that's going to be all of our projects. That water jasmine that I talked about that I grew in the big pot, all of them, they all got to be kind of treated the same way. As you want to start them out right so that, you know, you save time in the long run. Do the work on the front end so that you don't have to do the work on the back end. But I do recommend to everybody at least try this, you know, on like 1 or 2 projects. And even if you're not going to grow trees from the ground up like this, even you can see from some of the slides, I didn't like start every single tree from a trunk that I cut back to nothing. A lot of times I went and I bought a trunk that I already had, and then I kind of built out the branches under the clip and grow paradigm, or I built out proportion to thicken things under the clip and grow paradigm. So you can kind of ease your way in. You don't have to jump all in like, okay, I got to build my trees from scratch now. And that's what he said. And no other tree's good. Not the case. You can still kind of buy things and work in that way. But I want you guys, like I said before, is not you guys, anybody. I hope that we buy material that saves us time, not like adds more problems to our plate. Not something we're going to be beating our head against the wall for 6 years before we finally get it where we want it. You know, we want stuff that's moving in the direction that we're headed. So,
Yeah. Well, I do have a couple more questions. Darren asked about pad forming. Are you still
yes.
eliminating vertical buds and keeping laterals?
Oh, great question. Good question. So I'm going to have to kind of draw this one out a little bit. Let me see real quick. Actually, no, I
You
don't
want
think
me
I
to
need to draw.
highlight your
Nah,
stuff?
it's okay. I think I'll just kind of explain it. So as I go out, think you're building the 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 out, and you're building that flat. So you're building that on a flat horizontal plane. But then as things grow up, you are also building little tiny trees that go 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to so on, but small, very, very small. So I don't know what just
I
happened.
took your, I stopped your
Oh,
screen
cool. Oh,
so that
awesome.
we could see you better.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, so anything that's basically growing up from that pad, you will keep very, very short, and you're still growing the same structure, that 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, but you're growing it very, very tight to the top, and anything from the bottom removed. Now, this gets very, very confusing because we're always taught to remove growth growing to the top. But what I've kind of learned is there's a time, like if we're building structure, like if I'm trying to, I have a primary branch, well, I don't need leaves or part of the pad covering up the shoulder of the branch back here. I need to see some of that. And if we looked at a tree in nature, you don't see leaves on the inside structure of the tree. You see primary branches, secondary branches, tertiary branches, and then you get to leaves. And so the same is true with kind of pad formation, is that there will come a point where you, depending on the size of the tree and how much detail you want to show, where you have to abort the details of the branch and you go into just pad theory. And pad theory is, once we want to build a saucer of foliage, you need to build up, you need to build to the sides, and you need to eliminate anything growing straight down. So think you're growing up to the fine, very small little 1 to 2 to 4 to 8s. And then to the sides, you're growing your more robust structural 1 to 2 to 4 to 8s. And so it's a fractal. It really is a fractal where you're repeating the work up, you're repeating the work to the sides, you're repeating the work everywhere on the tree, just in smaller versions.
Okay. More questions.
Yeah,
Do you do clip and grow with olives?
I do. I do. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it works really, really well with olives, especially young olives. So young olives that are fast growing. If it's like an old collected olive that's growing, insanely slow, I don't know, I might kind of stick to the old, kind of just keep what I have, wire out the branches growing alternating and so on. But if it's a young olive and it's growing vigorous, no problem. They grow, clip and grow, no problem. It's just I'm like you guys. I don't want to wait 20 years if it's not going to work, clip and grow. If I'm not going to get any gain from it time wise, I'm not going to embark on it. So
Excellent. And asked about your, how early on did you decide where the front of the tree is?
Usually the first divide gives me a good indicator. All that can change though. All that can change drastically based on like where that back branch emerges from, like where you can position a back branch from, and just the overall feel of the tree. So like for instance, this guy right here that I was showing you guys before, this little Mame guy, is his original front was this side. And now I've transferred it to that side because I just felt that the branching and the trunk structure looked better after all the work I'd put in. It just looked better from this side. So even though I had assumed and built the tree the whole time thinking, that one side was going to be the front, this side ends up being the front. So it's you never really know till you're kind of really sort of finishing it up. But it's it changes all the time. There's never a concrete front.
Fertilization.
Mhm.
How often do you fertilize with nitrogen fertilizer during
I
the growing
use
season?
I use Harrell's, which is like a commercial grade Osmocote kind of, and I fertilize probably every 4 months. And it's rated as a 6-month time release fertilizer, but we get a lot of rain. We use an aggregate soil that it's not rated for, and so I've been using it for 16 years like that, and I haven't had any issues treating it about every 4 months.
Okay. And what are the differences in clip and growing deciduous versus evergreen broadleaf?
There really aren't any, aside from the fact that like you might want to wrap up your work on deciduous trees. Like I wouldn't be making your big cuts when you can't heal them. So like if the tree is going to be going dormant, it's not the best time to do your big trunk chop. It's not your best time to kind of get the tree, make your big chops at that time, because you're not even going to start healing until the tree starts to wake up and starts moving. Well, at least.
Right.
There's always contradictions. Like I said, maples and whatnot do all sorts of crazy stuff healing wise. They could be asleep and I don't know how they do it and they'll still heal. And same with crepes. So, but most of the trees I work with don't have that healing quality. So I like to practice it as if the tree is not going to do crazy healing.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Well, we have had many people say, thank you, you're great teaching, congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much.
Super enlightening.
Yeah.
But I think you've really given us a lot of food for thought. I wished I'd known this 6 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, it's once once you learn it, there, especially if you like it, there's no real going back, and it's just all fun from here on out. So
Yeah, when we put the video on the website, we will have your website on there as well. I've put it in the chat several times, and
awesome.
appreciate it. You did an excellent presentation. Really,
No,
really good.
yeah,
And
thank you so
audience,
much.
mark your calendars for April 22nd. Yannick Keegan from Belgium will be our next presenter. And it's wonderful way of learning. We appreciate that, all the way from Florida. So now you can go to bed, I hope.
I can go to bed now. I can try to go to bed. So we'll see. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, this was a lot of fun.